Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Hero Arts. In today's video, we are going to create this bold and vibrant 80s inspired card featuring the July 2022 My Monthly Hero Kit. I'll also share with you a great idea for adding a drop shadow and a black background to your sentiment. I'm going to start with a panel of white cardstock, and I'm going to die cut it with one of the dies from the Nesting Circles Infinity die set. Once I've got my circle cut out, I then am going to tape off the lower third. I'm using a piece of micropore tape, but you could use painter's tape as well. And now I'm going to start ink blending that upper third, starting with Creamsicle Reactive Ink. Just going to ink blend a little gradation here, kind of create the look of a sunset when I'm all done. After I get some of that Creamsicle down, I'll then move on to my next color, which is Taffy. I'm going to stick with the reactive inks for this sky, just because they blend so beautifully and they're really bold and vibrant, and that's definitely the look I'm going for with today's card. After I finish with the Taffy, we'll move on to some purples, starting first with Thistle. This is just going to be a little bit of this lighter purple just to help transition to the darker purple, which will finish up at the very top. So kind of getting progressively darker with our shades here. So this is our last purple, this beautiful dark purple galaxy here. I'm just going to ink blend that last little bit of our circle with this. And once I finish with that purple galaxy, I am all done with my sky, so I can go ahead and remove that piece of tape. And I'll actually use that a second time. I'm going to use that to actually tape off this the bit of the sky here, just to protect it while I ink blend the water. I'm going to start here with Pool Party and ink blend a little gradation here so it's darker at the bottom and then gets lighter towards the sky. And just to enhance that gradation a little bit more, I'm actually going to bring in a second color. I'm going to bring in blue raspberry and just ink blend that last little bit there. This is just a little bit darker shade, and it will help to make that ombre a little bit more noticeable. Now that we've finished with that water, I've sprayed some water down onto my work surface. I'm going to pick it up with a paintbrush, and I'm going to add some water splatters to the sky. I grabbed a little scrap of cardstock here to kind of protect the water, and I'm just splattering up here at the sky. And what this will look like, hopefully, is stars. So I'll just grab my towel here to pick that up, and it just has a little bit of an atmospheric effect to the sky. I think it's pretty cool. So now that my circle is all done ink blending, I'm going to stamp on it. I'm going to stamp with that detail layer for the water that's included in the stamp set with this kit. And I'm going to first stamp it at the upper portion of my water in Pool Party, which is my lighter of the two blues. Then I will reposition the stamp and stamp just below where I stamped the Pool Party, and this time I'm going to ink it up in Blue Raspberry, which is again a darker shade than that Pool Party, and that really is going to help to ground the flamingos later, so they don't kind of look like they're floating around in the water. It kind of grounds them a little bit. And now I'm just going to kind of repeat this process by repositioning that stamp and stamping all the way to the very bottom of the circle each time in that Blue Raspberry. Again, this just will really help to ground the scene a little bit, so the flamingos don't look like they're kind of floating around in space. So now that I finished stamping the water, we're ready to move on to the flamingos. So here's that stamp set again, and I'm going to start with the legs, and I'm actually only going to create kind of like a silhouette of the flamingos here. I just thought that it looks really cool, that black silhouette up against the really colorful background that we've created with the sky and the water. I'm starting with the legs here because that's just going to be easier to get everything positioned properly. So once I've had the legs in the right spot, I will then ink them up in INTENS-ified Black ink and stamp them. And because I want this to be really dark and solid, I will end up stamping this a couple of times here just to make sure those legs are really dark and a solid black. So I've stamped those legs a couple of times, and now we're ready to move on to the body. So now we're going to grab this more solid stamp for the bodies, position it up just above the legs, or actually a little bit overlapping the legs, so everything is very cohesive and fluid. And then once I finish picking that stamp up, I'll then ink it up with the INTENS-ified Black ink again and stamping it. And again, just like with the legs, and even more so true with the bodies, I do have to ink these up a couple of times and stamp them just to make sure that the flamingo bodies are nice and solid, and it really does look like a silhouette of a group of flamingos. So now that I have them all stamped, that's pretty much our whole little scene there. So now we're going to move on to our sentiment, which is kind of like almost the star of the show, I think, or at least it's a really fun addition to this card. I've combined a sentiment here with "You are flamazing," and I'm inking it up now with Thistle ink. I'm going to partially ink it up, just kind of the upper third of this, or the left third of this, in that Thistle. And I stamped it a couple times just to make sure it was bold. Now that I finished with Thistle, I'm going to move on to Taffy. Again, partially ink, and this time I'm trying to keep the ink in the center or the middle of my sentiment and stamp this. And as you can see, what we're doing here is creating kind of this ombre sentiment, which is really cool and pretty easy to make. You do need something like a stamp positioning tool to make sure you can stamp over and over again and create that ombre look. And then I'm finishing up with that last third in Creamsicle. Again, the same colors I used actually for the sky, except for I didn't use the purple galaxy, just because it's a little too dark. And now I'm inking up an embossing watermark ink and stamping over that ombre sentiment, and then dipping my sentiment into clear embossing powder. And this clear embossing powder, after I heat set this, will actually protect my sentiment from our black ink blending background that we'll create later. But there's one more thing I need to do before that background. I want to add that drop shadow. So I've got my sentiment still in my Misty, but now I'm going to take my cardstock with my stamp sentiment on it and kind of push it up just 1/16, so just up a tiny bit, and that's going to create a little drop shadow. You can see here I'm moving it up, and then I've applied some anti-static powder. Now I'm ready to ink up my sentiment in embossing and watermark ink again and stamp it. Now I'm going to dip my sentiment in to some more clear embossing powder and then heat set with my heat tool. And if you might be able to see if I hold up to the camera here that little bit of drop shadow, but that drop shadow is protected now, even though it was in clear, with that embossing powder. So now when we ink blend over this, we're going to have that cute little drop shadow in white, but also our whole sentiment that's in color is going to be protected too, because it is also clear embossed. So quickly ink blended that with the INTENS-ified Black ink, and now I'm just going to take a dry towel here and just kind of clean up that embossed area. And you can see our sentiment's getting nice and vibrant and bold again. And once I finish cleaning it up, we are actually going to cut this out. So I'm going to fussy cut this out, but you could kind of cut this into a sentiment strip if you prefer. I just really like the look of fussy cutting, and I don't mind fussy cutting at all. So I'm just going to quickly fussy cut around the sentiment, and once I finish this, we will address the edges, because obviously this was white cardstock before we ink blended it, and it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, that white edge, just because of the contrast between the black and the white. It really pops. But here you can see I'm all done fussy cutting it out, and now we're going to address that white edge here. And I'm going to hold it up so you can kind of see it a little bit. It's kind of poking through, kind of standing out. At least it definitely stands out more on your card. So I'm just going to take my blending tool again and just kind of blend all the sides here, again with the INTENS-ified Black. And because it's a little bit of a messy process, you do get the ink back on the clear embossing, so you have to kind of clean that up again with your dry towel. But once you finish that, your sentiment is all done. It kind of has this really cool, almost neon sign look. I really love it. I think that drop shadow adds so much, and the contrast of the black blending is just so cool and very fitting, I think, for this 80s inspired card. So now I'm just adding some foam adhesive to the back side of our circle and placing it onto the front of an A2 top folding white card base. Now I'm going to add some foam adhesive to the back side of our sentiment. Now I am going to have to add some double-sided adhesive, or doubled up, I should say, foam adhesive to the sides of the sentiment to support it. So I just cut a really thin strip and folded it, thin strip of foam adhesive, and folded it back on itself, and just added those two little doubled up foam adhesive pieces to the sides of my sentiment where they weren't coming in contact with the circle, just to support it. And then I've stuck it right down, and that will actually complete the card. And I'll hold up to the camera so you get a good look at all the details in this card. I love that bold, vibrant background with the cool water. I think that really helps to kind of balance everything out. The silhouette of the flamingos looks amazing against it. And of course, our sentiment kind of brings it all together with that perfect bit of 80s kitsch. I hope you guys enjoyed today's card and video. If you have any questions about the products I use, please check out the links below in my description. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.